Thank you for tuning in, guys. Wonderful news. I've recovered from the loss of brain cells I incurred the other day, where I was covering the situation where the VA for Paimon, Karina, was all like, "That video of me crashing out and raging was actually AI. That wasn't me." Of course, that's paraphrased, but yeah, you get the point. So, moving on from that, I've had a lot of people asking me to watch a video from Joe Zigga, a voice actor who's also worked on Genshin Impact, amongst a number of other things, and it's a very interesting video. It does provide some interesting insights on the things that have been occurring with the whole strike, so to speak, which I believe he's instead calling a collective work refusal. I think that's how he put it. That said, I do find it unfortunate how he was essentially defending SAG, the union, and in some cases, while not outright defending SAG, misdirecting attention away from them when they definitely deserve a lot of criticism. In other cases, he also brushes over the main issues that people have with this whole situation. And I think if he wanted to make this video, it would have been better for him to acknowledge those issues and to address them, because he didn't have to make this video. He chose to make that video, and the presentation that he went with is one that I find to be particularly biased. Now, that inherently would not be an issue, but in this context, it becomes one in my opinion. Let me explain why. And it comes down to the way he tried to present his video as if he wasn't biased, he wasn't even sharing his opinion really, and that he was only really presenting facts. And he makes it seem as if he's not trying to steer anyone any certain way. In the beginning of his video, he even outright says that his only goals are to really educate and de-escalate, but I don't find that to be true. I do find him to have a third goal, which is taking some of the heat off the union. On top of that, I also question how he's defining educate here, because it doesn't seem like he really wants to give everyone all the information to truly educate them. No, instead it seems like he's only giving certain parts of information out and withholding other parts of information in a way that's specifically trying to make SAG-AFTRA look better. This is particularly evident when you take a look at what he has to say about healthcare, which we'll get into in a little bit. But quick TLDR on that, he tries to blame Hoyoverse for the lack of healthcare that certain SAG members have. But years ago, SAG increased their healthcare premiums and screwed their own members, so much that a number of their own members were bringing forth litigation against the union for this. So I find it rather absurd that he's trying to blame Hoyoverse for, like, SAG members not having healthcare. This Chinese company is somehow at fault for that, when in reality it's the union itself that's been hurting its own members. We'll talk more about that though. Let me also address one more thing before we get started. I've seen some people say that he's not allowed to criticize SAG because he's a part of SAG, but I don't find that to be a particularly compelling excuse, because ultimately he's a grown man who can make his own decisions, and if he's choosing to be a part of a union that's restricting his speech, that's on him. And then if he also chooses to get involved in this ongoing situation with Genshin VAs and all that, making it seem like he's not trying to steer anyone any certain way when it really seems like he is, then that's also on him. We've also seen plenty of voice actors succeed without joining SAG. They don't want to join the union, and they don't. And a final thing about the argument that he's not allowed to criticize SAG, and he's not allowed to criticize the voice actors who have been acting all toxic and terrible towards people. If that's really where the bar is, if we really can't have a voice actor tell the other VAs that they should probably stop harassing people, that it's not cool to harass Jacob Takanashi for accepting work when that role has been open for 6 months, and that it's also not a good thing to attack fans who are simply asking questions about all this stuff. Like, if VAs are really not allowed to say anything like that because they're afraid that they're going to get blacklisted by SAG or the industry, or attacked by their other VA peers, well, it just goes to show how terrible the industry is, how corrupt it all is, and why so many people in gaming communities are calling this whole thing like some kind of weird clique, and that SAG comes off like some kind of cult. And hopefully at some point we'll see more VAs taking a stand against this stuff, because that's the only way things are going to change. Like, if you keep bowing to these people, nothing's going to change for the best. Now, look, let me also be clear about this. This is not like a takedown video of Joe. I've simply had a lot of people asking me to watch this video and give my opinion on it. And I'll also mention, Joe seems like he could be a likable guy, but that also doesn't mean I need to blindly go along with everything he says either. But okay, anyways, on to the main video itself, the one he made 5 days ago, titled Genshin and the SAG-AFTRA Strike, What You Need to Know. I will play the parts of the video that I find to be the most important, that I really do want to address. And yeah, thanks for your patience. Let's get started.
So, we've lost our shared humanity over a f***ing gotcha game.
Okay guys, it's time we had a talk about Genshin, Hoyo, and the strike, because man, it sucks out there right now. And before I start, I do want to say a big thank you to everyone who I consulted with while I was writing this script, okay? I talked with union members, I talked with non-union members, talent and fans, etc. My goal here is twofold: educate and de-escalate. Given that nearly every social media platform has become a powder keg, I'm getting a little tired of seeing our shared humanity deteriorate over a gotcha game.
Okay, so yeah, I think he should be more specific. Like, we lost our collective humanity. Yeah, some toxic VAs did, that's for sure. Advocating to harass others and like advocating for violence against others. Then you simply had the Genshin fandom reacting to that, and other people across the internet at large also reacting to that. And then saying it sucks out there. I mean, kind of, I guess, but at the same time, it exposed the industry to a lot of people who are now aware of how they were being manipulated by a number of VAs. So arguably that's like a good thing, actually, people becoming aware of that and no longer falling for it. And once again, in case anyone says like, he's got to phrase it this way, he's not allowed to say certain things, I already addressed that in my intro, so hopefully everyone gets my point on that already. And similarly, I think I addressed this part as well, but this is what I was talking about, where he says he's got two goals: to educate and de-escalate. But I don't find that to really be honest. I do think he's got a third goal that he's not disclosing, and that is to subtly take some of the heat off the union itself, which I will provide more evidence of as we continue, so let's do that.
Hoyo is not a scrappy indie dev trying to count pennies to make it by. This is a multi-billion-dollar company operating on a global scale. If anyone has the resources, legal muscle, and the infrastructure to navigate a union contract, it's them. I said I would avoid speculation in this video, so I won't start throwing around ideas as to why Hoyo hasn't done this yet, other than what I've already said. But I do want to emphasize that this action is absolutely well within their power. Other companies like them in China have signed union agreements in the past. So yes, the paperwork is real, the finances are real, the international complications are real, but let's be honest, resource constraints are not the barrier here. And that's part of what's made this situation so frustrating for so many people. The perception, maybe the reality, I'm not sure, that Hoyo could fix this with just a single signature on a union contract and just hasn't done it, right? That's what's frustrating people.
I don't like how he's trying to make it seem like it's Hoyo's responsibility to fix this. Like, they're not the ones who started this whole situation, first of all. That is the VAs who are doing this collective work refusal against Hoyoverse. His own argument also kind of hurts his point here, where he says other Chinese companies have signed union contracts in the past. Okay, so perhaps the issue is the union contract then, not Hoyoverse. For example, one of the main issues that people have in this whole situation is it seems like the union agreement is one that will negatively impact non-union VAs, as SAG VAs seem to want to flip the entire job union, and Hoyoverse may not want to lose their non-union VAs. So I don't think it's a great framing where he's like, oh, Hoyoverse just needs to put one little signature on the contract, that's all they need to do to fix this whole thing.
Had Hoyo gone union a year ago, many of the actors working on it would have qualified for their health insurance on Genshin alone. A huge, huge benefit for actors. Yes, big corporations take a long time to make these sort of large decisions, but how long is too long? I can't answer that, and neither can people on Twitter.
Okay, so let's talk about the healthcare thing. It's pretty crazy to me that he's actually trying to make people feel as if Hoyoverse is at fault. This Chinese company, Hoyoverse, is at fault for SAG union members not qualifying for their health insurance. The reality is, SAG's own policies are what's been hurting their own members, and I'll explain how right now. In 2021, SAG raised the required earnings threshold for healthcare to around $26,000, which caused thousands of their own members to lose coverage. Seniors were especially hurt because around 8,000 of them were pushed onto Medicare with a reimbursement account. And furthermore, SAG made it so seniors aged 65 and older and on pension no longer had income from their residuals count towards eligibility. The whole thing was such a mess that thousands of their own members were calling the union highly corrupt. Seniors taking things further and bringing forth litigation against SAG for age discrimination, which SAG decided to settle out of court. The union tried to excuse all of these changes due to financial issues from COVID. However, this only made the union look even worse, as they were now intentionally cutting the healthcare benefits of thousands of their own members during a pandemic. And many of those seniors were paying into that healthcare plan for decades, only for SAG to then turn around and throw them under the bus. Fast forward to 2025, and members now need around $28,000 in earnings to even qualify, with 2% rate hikes forced on them yearly. But hey, don't question any of that stuff. It's really Hoyoverse who should be responsible for union members getting healthcare benefits.
You might have heard the term Taft-Hartley thrown around, and I advise you really just don't look too deep into this because it's confusing.
Don't look too deep into this. This is only one of the most important points regarding the issues people have with SAG-AFTRA and their potential agreement with Hoyoverse, and how it will potentially lead to non-union VAs losing their jobs. But yeah, don't look too much into this one. As funny as his framing there sounds, I will give Joe credit because he does go on to explain the important parts of this issue pretty well. That said, there still are some issues, but let's get the context first.
It's a piece of labor law that actually has nothing to do with SAG-AFTRA. It was written in 1947 and designed as a path to both protect people from being forced to join unions, but also offer them more flexible ways to join if they want to.
So this is where things become a bit of a semantical argument because the initial law was more so about labor and unions, not specifically SAG-AFTRA. But the way Taft-Hartley applies currently, where we're at right now, it absolutely does affect SAG-AFTRA. It directly affects how non-union talent may be forced to lose roles that become union, but also how they're able to join the union if they want to.
For our purposes, bringing it back to us, consider a Taft-Hartley like a temporary 60-day union pass to allow someone who is non-union to work on a union job. After that, they're considered a must join, at which point, like the status implies, they must join the union or stop working union jobs. I'll break here for a second and tell you that it is significantly more complicated than that. There are caveats as to when the Taft-Hartley triggers, for example. It's also possible to negotiate an individual waiver with the union and say, look, I'm only ever going to work this one union job. Please don't make me join. I won't do anything else. And they can say yes. There's flexibility here. These, however, are edge cases that are just beyond the scope of this video. This would be a 5-hour video. In the simplest sense, you can do on a Taft-Hartley a very limited amount of union work as a non-union member before you have to join. And that sort of makes perfect sense if you think about it. The union offers actual tangible benefits, even for a single contract. Reaping those benefits without being a union member and paying your dues is like extending your Netflix free trial indefinitely. At some point, you gotta pay for what you're using.
No, in this context, it's more like Netflix forcing a free trial onto you that you didn't ask for and then trying to charge you for it. And as for the rest of what he had to say there, it's putting way too many assumptions on SAG, being kind to non-union talent. Because it's like this, to my understanding at least. If Genshin Impact ends up flipping union, which seems to be what many, if not all of these union individuals want, they want Genshin and Hoyoverse in general to have their games become union games. That would mean that the non-union talent can no longer work on those games. But hey, maybe they'd be able to work it out. According to Joe here, maybe they'd be able to work it out with SAG and be like, hey, I don't want to join the union, but I promise this is like the one thing I'm going to do where I'm working a union job. Well, that job wasn't a union job at first. Now suddenly you're telling that person, oh, by the way, now you're working a union job. We got to kick you out. And you gotta hope that person is able to beg SAG not to do that. Of course, the alternative is they simply join the union, but many of these people don't want to, and for good reason. And furthermore, if we're supposed to expect that SAG is going to be kind towards the non-union people who don't want to join them, that SAG is going to let them keep working these jobs that flip to become union jobs, that seems like a very bold assumption, and one that's likely not to work out well for the non-union individual. As discussed previously, Duncan Crabtree Ireland, National Executive Director for SAG-AFTRA, has been on air publicly, making disparaging remarks towards non-union talent, calling them lesser quality. On SAG-AFTRA's own website, they have a whole section about how union actors are better actors than non-union actors, going on to say things like union actors are better actors, quote unquote. This is true. You're better because union actors uphold the industry standards for all performers. Union actors are experienced professionals who know how to act on set. Pun intended. They go on and on about how their union actors are better than those lowly non-union people. And more directly with the Genshin situation, we've seen how toxic a number of the union VAs have been, especially towards Jacob Takanashi, who's not union, and towards anyone who would criticize the union. People on the Genshin Impact subreddit, for example. They were pointing out inconsistencies with some union VA's arguments. Then you had one VA trying to get the whole Genshin Impact subreddit banned for it.
What happens to actors, both union and non-union, if they do sign an agreement with the union? Contrary to many misinformed Twitter rants, that does not mean that all the non-union actors on the game would get replaced. That's a wildly ignorant claim, and one that's very harmful to progress to spread. The real answer is, as you might expect at this point if you've been paying any attention at all, it depends.
No, actually, it's not ignorant at all to be concerned about how such an agreement can negatively impact non-union talent. As I just went over, one of the top executives for SAG and SAG's own website as well as a number of their own members, have disparaged non-union individuals, and they seem like they'd all be very happy to replace non-union talent with union talent. So no, it's certainly not ignorant to be concerned about such things. If anything, it's the inverse. And given the way he's using the word progress in this context, it seems like progress is really just a stand-in for the union's goals.
Do you know what company isn't in that select group of production companies being struck? Hoyo. I cannot emphasize enough that MiHoYo properties are not and never have been union games. Therefore, Genshin has never been a struck property. There are 0 union rules governing Genshin or any MiHoYo game, period. End of story as of this date. This is not a debate. Okay, so why the hell aren't actors going in to record lines for Genshin if it's not struck? When the strike happened, many Genshin actors got together in various disparate channels and decided that now would be a good time to try to engage with Hoyo and encourage them to take some action. Actors could use the momentum, the social momentum of the SAG-AFTRA strike to include Hoyo properties in the conversation. Again though, it's not a strike, and it has nothing to do with the union.
So pretty opportunistic of them. Pretty snaky in a way too. According to Joe's argument on healthcare, he was also making the implication that Hoyoverse pays pretty dang well for a VA gig. In other words, a lot of these VAs seem like they were already having it pretty good working on Hoyoverse games. This is also further evidenced with how Hoyoverse fought for their VAs during the Formosa situation. But regardless, this wasn't good enough for those English VAs. They saw an opportunity to try and demand more, and they took it. Now, of course, Joe didn't outright say this, but piecing everything together, that's the picture that we can pretty clearly see was happening, at least in my opinion. So regardless of his intent, I do appreciate him providing us with this information. That said, while there might not be an official strike against Hoyoverse, we do know that SAG is somewhat involved and they do want Hoyoverse to sign an agreement. For example, the official Twitter account for SAG-AFTRA literally had all this to say. Back on March 26, when we saw the voice actress Daenerys saying, "Hey Genshin Impact, Honkai Star Rail, ZZZEN, we English VAs would love to get back to work. I know the fans miss hearing their fave Karas, and we miss voicing them. Please negotiate with SAG-AFTRA and sign the interim agreement to guarantee AI protections for us." To which SAG-AFTRA retweeted that, saying, "What Daenerys Q said. Hey Genshin Impact, Honkai Star Rail, ZZEN, we'll make it easy for you. Here's a link to our interactive video game media agreements. Let's talk soon, wink." As you probably already know, this ended up with them getting community noted both tweets, with this one that says, "This agreement has severe limitations on how MiHoYo can work with non-union voice actors, including a lifetime time limit for the voice actor, and eventually forcing the VA to either join the union, which has large entry costs and fees, or stop working on the project." What's really interesting is, at some point between the last time I covered this, because back then Daenerys' tweet was still there, which was like last week if I recall, and me taking a look at this again now, it looks like Daenerys has actually deleted the tweet that she made.
I want you to understand that I'm not getting to this here because this is not measurable. It is a feeling. It is actually part of the problem in a lot of ways. So when we start asking questions like, well, why doesn't everyone just go FICOR? Or are people being blacklisted for working on non-union games during the strike? These really deal with non-measurable social feelings that can be very powerful, yes, but fall outside the bounds of what I'm trying to do here with this video, which is give as much factual clarity as I can.
Well, it's not really an immeasurable feeling, though. If someone got blacklisted for working on a non-union game during a strike, well, the fact would therefore then be that they got blacklisted for working on a non-union game.
There are absolutely subjective social effects for doing things like being FICOR, working off the carb, not participating in a collective work refusal like what's going on with Genshin right now. There are also subjective social effects for doing things like reporting other actors who are breaking Global Rule 1, which some see as snitching, or getting involved in online arguments that explode in publicity firestorms. But since I can't define those, I really don't feel like they have a place in this video. Anyone who says they have the facts on social repercussions during a time like this is certainly definitively incorrect, because there is no such thing.
Once again, no, I think what he's saying is actually incorrect here. We do have verifiable evidence, in other words, facts, about what can happen to someone during a situation like this. Just take a look at what happened to Jacob Takanashi a few weeks ago. Guy gets hired as the role for Kenichi and gets tons of union voice actors harassing the guy, trying to make him sound like some terrible individual. In the case of Cher Kirby, she had this to say on Blue Sky: "This got to be the most classless thing I've seen with everything going on. Have fun with Genshin. You'll never work on anything else, LMFAO." Which is essentially saying that he's been blacklisted. Now, while we don't know if he ended up getting blacklisted for taking the role of Kenichi or not, we do factually know that a lot of VAs harassed him for taking that role. And for the record, this sort of thing far predates the Jacob Takanashi situation in Genshin and all that. I mean, this goes all the way back to the 18th century, with the creation of the word scab itself, and what union members would do to these so-called scabs. This is something we even saw voice actors over on Blue Sky bragging about, that very thing. For example, Zane over here saying, everyone forgets that one of the big parts of union culture is being real freaking mean to scabs. Those are the people who betrayed their fellow workers, and they need to be reminded of it. And Aiden Rudd responding, saying, unions had mob ties and would actively assault scabs in the 60s. And now we're just like, oh, please don't think I'm the bad guy for being robbed by this opportunistic clown. Given the timing and the context of that, likely being in reference to Jacob Takanashi. And then he says, I'm not saying we should assault people, but like, this is an instance where shaming is good. So yeah, bringing it back to Genshin once again and Jacob Takanashi. The facts here are that one guy took a job that he was hired for, and he ended up getting harassed by tons of VAs. Some were trying to sound like these real tough guys here, like, oh, we used to assault people for doing stuff like this. Yeah, real tough for all these people to team up against one single individual for taking a job that wasn't filled for around 6 months.
When you see individual people making individual decisions, remember that they're individuals. No one is the villain in their own story. But you might be the villain in somebody else's.
Bro should really post that over on I'm 14 and this is deep. Seems like something they'd love over there.
I also hope I achieved my objective of teaching instead of influencing, okay? I'm not looking for you to take action. I'm looking for you to understand and think for yourself.
So he says he wants people to think for themselves. But throughout that video, he only gives you select bits of information, which is clearly trying to steer you a certain way, at least in my opinion. For example, the healthcare stuff. He'll tell you how Hoyoverse can help the union members get healthcare, but he conveniently doesn't tell you how the union itself hurt its own members.
It is my sincere hope that this video will move the global conversation forward toward a productive resolution that respects not just human performers, but human beings. As I wrap this up, I imagine that many of you are feeling a little hollow. You might have come here looking for the right answer, and I've just spent a fair amount of time telling you that there might not be one. I'm not here to give you a best path forward. Other than that, I know that the toxic online discourse needs to stop immediately, and we need to spend a lot more time listening than talking.
Yeah, so this goes back to what I said at the very beginning of the video where he was saying stuff like, oh, we've all lost our collective humanity over a gacha game. It's terrible out there. And it's like, bro, tell it to the voice actors who keep harassing people and acting all toxic. Don't loop in the rest of the internet with those toxic individuals for criticizing what they're doing.
Thank you for taking the time to get educated. Thank you for your passion, your creativity, your enthusiasm, your art.
When he says thank you for getting educated, it just comes off a bit weird because he's, as mentioned, selectively given certain bits of information and selectively left things out. For example, things that rightfully make SAG look bad. So it's not really thank you for getting educated. It's more so like thank you for letting me tell you certain things and not telling you certain other things.
Thank you for listening. Go be kind to each other.
Well, at least that's a nice message. And also credit to Joe for the very professionally put together video. That said, you know the issues that I have with it. And to reiterate something I said way back at the beginning of this video, it's really unfortunate that a VA really can't address a community on the internet and the issues they have with the union and the union side of things without trying so hard to beat around the bush, like being so afraid of saying the wrong thing that might upset SAG-AFTRA and these SAG-AFTRA VAs. But enough of my opinion. Let me know what you think about all of that in the comments. And in closing, as has been tradition, we'll take a look at some of the CN Billy reactions to Joe's video, provided to us once again by Boyching. Thank you for collecting the comments from our CN bros overseas and translating them and posting them. Let's take a look. Is this video by the union to detach themselves from those VAs? The union want to reduce the damage on their reputation, so they sent out a VA to calm things down. So basically, what he, Joe, is saying is that the union didn't request them to strike, they just wanted to. I thought previously that it sucked for the VA to be forced to strike and lose their jobs, but if they chose to, then they deserve it. Well, the union definitely put some pressure on them. The local VAs can't afford to offend the union and lose their job. Joe himself said the VAs who were working during the strike were doing it in secret. We just don't know who chose to go on strike and who were forced to. Hoyo gotta make a character story quest out of this once this whole thing is over. Maybe it'll appear in one of Honkai Star Rail's quests or relic stories. So he, Joe's on strike? I don't think he had any lines since the strike started, lol. Yeah, those who didn't are mostly Natlon characters. Real Thistly hasn't appeared for centuries. Well, Real Thistly, it's Joe's character. Hopefully I'm saying that right, by the way. I always forget some Genshin pronunciations like Chlorind. It's another one that always gets me. Well, Real Thistly hasn't had any in-game lines for the past year. He just had his first rerun recently. All the crowd characters trying to break the longest rerun record, haha. He hasn't had any lines, so no one knows if he's striking or not. Have they consumed too much primordial seawater and lost their memories? Oh yeah, see, this is the SAG thing that we talked about earlier. They're talking about that too, dude. Our CN bros, they know their stuff. They've been keeping up with all this pretty well. Translation of the tweet: we want to go back. Hoyo, please sign the contract. Hoyo gotta remember this. They need to pick VAs more carefully from now on. I think the VAs are provided by the studios. It's no use. It's like last time when Mita and other games developers complained that CN VAs were too expensive. That's because they were local middle agencies finding suitable VAs, and they chose the pricing. For Hoyo, all they can get out of this is to know which agencies they should not work with in the future. As for the VAs, who would have known before it all began? There are VA drama from all 4 languages. And dang, these VAs can be separated into 11 factions at this point. Where's my Nod Cry reality show saying slight mistranslation? Second half of the sentence should be, without you guys, Nod Cry won't be as fun. Well, on the note about fun, it is always fun seeing what our CM bros have to say about things. So as mentioned before, let me know what you think too in the comments. As always, thank you so much for tuning in. Consider liking and or subscribing if you enjoyed the coverage, and I'll see you in the next one.